All right, so the first thing I'm going to go ahead and attack in getting all of the setup for this week is the actual, I'm going to set up the action and the view for creating a new account. So the action, we're actually going to have two. We're going to have the get and the post action. So we'll have public action result, and this will be called create. And this will be our HTTP get action, and that'll just return the view. So nothing fancy. The second one will be public action result, and I'm actually going to do something a little different here. I haven't covered this in the past, but I'll talk more about it once we get there. And this will be create, and then we will have a create account view model. And ultimately what I want is I want to have this class called create account view model. And I'll zoom in a little bit. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is I need to first create my create account view model class. So I have a model. And I'm just going to highlight that and copy it. Jump into my Solution Explorer, go to Models, right-click here, Add Class. So I'm just adding a new class to my Models page, and so I don't have to type, I just paste that name in there. And it'll create a new class for me. So I now have this new class that will be my view model for my account creation. And we'll come back to that in a minute. And I'm going to throw a new not implemented exception. It's not implemented. There we go. And basically what happens is on my view, if I run this right now and I had a view and I hit that button, this would come back and balk at me and say, throw an exception, not implemented. It'll tell me that on the screen. So that's just kind of a reminder for me, and often I do that. I'll put exceptions in my code when I haven't written what I need, and I'll put a not implemented exception. So that way if I try to run it and I forget that I stopped writing this chunk of code, at runtime it'll balk at me and complain and say, nope, you need to come back. Another trick you can do is you can do pound error. Is that it? No, pound warning. I don't remember what there's a compile time thing you can do. I forget what it is though. I think it's warning. All right, anyway, so we have our get method and our post method or action. So those are our two pieces of server-side functionality that we're going to need. So now we need to create that view to accompany it. Now, to do that view, I'm going to jump back into my view model. And I'm just going to kind of flesh out what fields do I need inside of my view model. I'm going to need first name. I'll need last name. I will need username. I'll need email address. I'll need password. I'll need password confirm. So if you type prop double tab, it'll give you that fill in the blank like you saw there. So that way you don't have to type all of it out, and it gives you the shorthand notation. What did you type? Prop, P-R-O-P. So let's say PROP double tab, and then it defaulted to an int type, but I could type over that, and I can say string. I don't know what this would be, my property, but you would change that to whatever you want. So they call those snippets within Visual Studio. They're just little snippets of code so that you don't have to type it all out. There's things for constructors, properties, try-catch blocks, for each loops, for loops. A lot of that stuff has snippets. You can even create your own snippets. Yeah, you can create your own snippets. There's tutorials on how to do that. It's kind of a pain in the butt. All right. So at this point, where's my mouse? So we have these two things at this point. We've got our class. It's not pretty. And we have our async method and our two methods. So the last piece we need to do is then actually create our view that goes with these actions. So I'm going to jump back to my controller, right click here and say add view, and it pulls the name of my view from my action. The template I'm actually going to go ahead and use is a create template. That's just to minimize the amount of code I need to write. And then from my models, I'm going to choose my create account view model. And I'm going to hit add. As always, make sure that the create a partial view is not checked, because we don't want a partial view. And it will create for us a form to create an account. So instead of me typing all of that out, it just did it for me. Pretty good deal. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this right out of the gate to see what it looks like. Okay, so that's not too bad for auto-generated code, right? So we have our first name, last name, username, email, password confirm, and then a little button that says create. So at this point, we can actually fill out this form, hit the button to create, and we should get a not implemented exception. And we'll have to convert those from text box force to password force for the password, and we'll hit create. And there's our not implemented exception. So we've built out that view. So if we go back and look at this in a little bit of detail, let me stop my debugger. You'll see here that the auto generator has some helper methods that it uses. So it kind of plays dumb and says, oh, I'll just fake it till I make it. So what happens is that there's the label for, which is points into our model and says create a new label control. I'm okay with that. Then there's another helper which is called editor for. Editor for, and there's a sister method called display for, are actually very powerful methods. They look at the data structure and the data type of the property and try to determine the best way to render it on the form for you. So what's that mean? Strings, it generates a text box. Date time types, it will attempt to wire up some JavaScript and actually give you one of those calendar dropdowns. Checkboxes, or Boolean values, they render out as checkboxes. That's another one. Integers will actually render out with text boxes, but they render out with text boxes that, if JavaScript is enabled, will do numeric validation and only allow numeric values. It won't let you put text in those. Things like that. If you got the right switches flipped and the right pieces turned on. So it's actually a very smart piece of functionality. It, however, is not great when it comes to some nuances of forms, like password fields and things like that. There's attributes that you can use to tell it what to do. They don't always work great, but they generally work fine. But you can even say that you want to do a custom display for a specific type. So let's say you create your own class, and you actually are passing in a view model that has a property that is another view model type, and you want to render that out on a page. I can't think of a great example at the moment. Let's say it's a student view model, and you want to be able to render a little card type thing on the screen that says this is the picture of the student, this is their name, and all of this information. Well, you would have to code all of that every time you wanted to show that student information. Well, instead, you can actually create a template and say that this is the display view, partial view, for a student object. And there's certain ways that you put files into your views folder, and you set those up, and you basically say this is to display a student. And then instead of just generating some text boxes or some labels, it'll actually render out that chunk of HTML. But all you had to do was write one line of code that said html.display for model arrow model.student. And it'll inject and drop that HTML on the page for you. So there's some niceties about using those editors. In this case, it works fine for us for first name, last name, username, and email. As we scroll further down, we get to password and password confirm. Not so smart. So here, we'll change editor 4 to password 4. And we'll do the same with the one below it, because we want those to render out as password boxes. Another piece of code, I talked about those attributes or those decorations. We can jump into our view model, and we can add required attributes to our properties. So what does that mean? Let me rerun this without the debugger. So let's say I went through and I cleared all of these boxes. So if I leave them all blank and I hit create, it'll let me do that. No problem. Well, I don't want to allow someone to submit the form without filling in all the fields. So what I could do is I could write some validation code for each one of these text boxes, very tedious. Or I can come up here and I can say required, and add from the system.componentModel.data annotations namespace, there's a required attribute. Anytime in .NET where you put square bracket and something in between them, it's considered adding an attribute or decorating a property, in this case, with an attribute. So we're adding the required attribute to our properties. By adding that attribute, we're telling ASP.NET MVC that this field is required. So I'll rebuild, I'll flip back, and you just add those attributes to the line above that property. I'll reload the page. It's the only change I made. Page looks the same, and now if I go down and click create, there's JavaScript that gets triggered to now perform validation.
How come the password and password confirm boxes are different?
It's because they did not pick up the styling. I was actually wondering that myself. It ended up taking the HTML attributes and literally injecting it here instead of creating a class. So let's jump back to our code and take a look. So password 4 probably has different overloads, is my guess. So it takes an expression. Okay. So I think this object here is just an extra layer that's not needed since we changed that type. So the curly bracket and new prior to HTML attributes, I'm deleting that. I'm changing the equal to a colon, and then on the far end of that line there's another curly bracket. The pair, I'm deleting that, and that takes care of it. I'm going to look at the line above it and see why it's needing it that way. Expression. So the editor for takes, there's multiple overloads, but the one it's using is the one that takes the lambda expression, and then it just takes an object of additional view data, where when we use password for, it explicitly looks for HTML attributes, all of those things, so it's more explicit in its overloads, whereas editor for is more generic because it can be handling things in multiple different ways. So what was happening ultimately is where it said HTML attributes equals new class, that HTML attributes equals new class was getting injected as an attribute in our HTML. Instead of class being injected, it was injecting HTML attributes. So it was a layer too deep, we just had to roll it back one.
Why did you do it for the other ones?
For the other ones, because the other ones actually have a different overload. They take different attributes. Let me go, come on. There we go. So here it's saying lambda expression, da-da-da, expression. That's the model arrow model document. That's the first parameter that we pass in. The second parameter then is additional view data. Let me scroll down to another overload and see if it gives us better details. Okay, it's not. So basically it's saying that it's additional data that will be merged into the view data dictionary for the model. I'd have to go back and look at the actual documentation, but basically what this allows you to do is typically we have like route values and HTML attributes that these more specific implementations take. I think they're just falling it up into one giant unit. Saying create another anonymous type and just package all that additional data in there. And then when it goes to render, it's pulling it out. I'm sure I'm not explaining this in enough detail without. But what's happening basically is it's having to repackage it so that it can just ship it and then it gets unpacked later. So it's in the documentation is probably the best way I can explain it to you. Is that editor for is going to utilize one of these methods like password for. So let me try to explain it the other way. So password for, okay, that's it, okay. So password for takes in the same expression, and then it actually takes in an object of HTML attributes. Okay. These HTML attributes is not one of the options up here. You'll see some of these where they take an expression, route values, and HTML attributes. All of that latter data all gets passed as one giant anonymous type when you're using editor for. Does that make a little bit more sense now? So you're having to pass all of that as a chunk, and then when we passed it down here that way, it said, oh, this actually goes into HTML attributes. So the attributes became HTML attribute was the attribute name in HTML, and then the string ended up being that line of code, which is not what we want. So by changing it and reloading, it changed around to now say this input has a class, a form control, data val is true, data val required, password field required, the ID, name, and type. So if we flip back to the page itself, now the text boxes have the same styling. And just as a reminder that styling, to make the boxes look this way, to make the layout look this way, is part of that Bootstrap style framework. So the form-control class comes from Bootstrap. The way that this layout is being handled, with the labels to the left, the boxes to the right, all of that is being handled by Bootstrap, style sheet framework. So it's not an ASP.NET MVC specific thing, it's just ASP.NET MVC templates have Bootstrap preset as part of the project template.